My name is Michael Cracroft. I'm the Chief Security Technology Officer for Service New South Wales. And as Nathan said, I'm here to talk to you about balancing the autonomy and the governance and the compliance aspects in our DevOps transformation journey, which within government comes with its own challenges. I would also like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people who are the traditional custodians of the land of Australia, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also the Gadigal of the Illawarra Nation, who are also the traditional custodians of this land, Sydney. Thank you. So Service New South Wales, unless you're not familiar with the state, is effectively our one-stop shop for government. We have multiple services that we provide to the community through different channels, be it digital, call centre or service centres. And in the last 5 years since we began, we've opened up 102 service centres across the state, which is an interesting tidbit, equates to about 1 every 3 weeks for the last 5 years, which is quite a remarkable number. We have a focus to try and make government easy for our customers, and that's by reducing the complexity and the legacy of government and making it easy for our customers to interact with us and get the services that they need in one convenient place. Our customer base has grown considerably. We have about 4.69 million My Service account users now, which is almost 60% of the state's population. And we also have a 97% customer satisfaction rating from those who are coming through our doors and talking to us, which is no mean feat, to say the least. It's safe to say that the customer experience is at the heart of everything that we do, and that's really partly why I'm here today, because we're always looking at what's the next thing we can do to improve our customer experience and the outcomes that they get. I'm also very pleased to say that we recently were awarded 8th in the 2019 Great Place to Work Australia, which is, again, a first for public service. And it's also something I think we should be very proud of, because we beat a lot of tech firms who actually have beer on tap, which we don't have. So well done to the team. You can see they were pretty excited picking up the award. And so very proud of that achievement. I should also add that we are hiring, so if anyone wants to talk to us afterwards, please come and speak to me outside. So Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum made this quote, and I love this, which is, in the new world, it is not big fish which eats the small fish, it is the fast fish which eats the slow. And I think this really speaks to the problem and the paradigm that we're all dealing with at the moment, which is our customer expectations are changing rapidly. We have customers who want to consume our services in any format at a particular day or time of the day or night, and they want to consume it in a device and an experience that is comparable to the other experiences that they have in their private sector, be it mobile banking and things of that nature. We also have a paradigm shift in terms of technology and the way the landscape of technology is changing, and how we as a government service agency try and keep pace with the private sector in terms of adopting and adapting to the ever-changing digital world that we live in. When you think about our responsibility towards customer privacy and the security aspects, cyber resilience is a huge part of our landscape that we all have to strive to manage. In terms of speed and velocity, I will point out that we're not there yet. We haven't solved all the problems I'm going to speak to you about today. But what we do have is an increased capability and acceleration, and we're constantly looking and testing ways that we can continue to improve that. So in the last financial year, we released 36 commitments for government, which is no small feat again. So how do we keep pace with our customer expectations, deliver high quality services, and build products that customers love? Now, I hope at this point you might all join in and say, DevOps. I appreciate it's late in the afternoon, so I'll try and throw in some things for you. The answer's simple, right? DevOps. We've all bought the T-shirt, or been given it in this case, and you follow the recipe, and everything works the way you expect. That's what we all like to see and like to imagine. I guess I'm here to talk to you about our experience of our transformation towards DevOps, what's working and what's not, and how we're continuing to adapt and improve our processes. While I do that, I'll take you on a little digital journey for Service New South Wales as well. So we began in 2013, and we started to build our services in a platform, extending the capabilities by building services on top and digital transactions on top of that platform. And so we very quickly ended up going from effectively a startup organization with one kiosk to a very dense, complicated digital platform, which perhaps somewhat unkindly I'll refer to as monolithic in this case. Then in 2017, we started to pivot and take advantage of cloud and infrastructure as a service. And that was really to help us take the advantage of the switch towards OpEx funding as well. So building services that could be more responsive to our partner agencies and our customer requirements so that they could be scaled up and provisioned in a more dynamic way. And that solved some of the problems for us around scale and performance. But in 2018, as we're not an organization that likes to stay still for very long, we started pivoting again and adopting a product team model. This is really taking the two-pizza concept from firms like Amazon and Netflix and looking at how we can change our organizational structure to provide better outcomes for our customers. We've been adopting a product team methodology and agile and lean practices throughout that. And that's really a process and a people transformation, which I'll speak to more in a second. And we're currently undergoing another transformation, which is really looking to switch away from the infrastructure model to more of an API and microservice capability. And we're actually refactoring our, what was monolithic in quotes, services, and looking at how we can more clearly define them and loosely couple them so that they can be refactored and molded and improved over time. And part of that, we're actually almost cannibalizing the systems that we used to have, because we would previously have built a service that was intended for a very specific outcome. And now what we're doing is we're using our product teams to take that, what the underlying requirement of that outcome is, and look at building something that is instead more reusable and can be refactored and shared across government and provide a greater degree of scale and broader outcomes as opposed to narrow outcomes. The next part of the journey for us is really about moving beyond that microservice transformation and looking at the concept of continuous assurance. So we have teams doing continuous integration and continuous delivery, but really it's a continuous assurance piece that I think is going to give us that true autonomy and governance that I'm speaking about today. So just a quick example of our team structure around product teams. Product team will typically have three roles: a product manager, a number of product engineers who work in pairs, and product designers. And we really follow the lean startup methodology of build, measure, learn. And that's all underpinned and supported by a roadmap. So each product team is iterating on capabilities that fit a certain customer requirement and looking at how to build those out. And we're trying to, in that team, join together the necessary skill sets to ensure that our experience for the customers is delivered on time and in a way that they require it. And that emphasis on design as part of that CX experience, I think is really crucial to some of our success to date. Obviously with that comes certain challenges around how we retain and recruit staff, and again for government that's always a difficult activity. So as part of our adoption of the product team model, one thing that you'll see if you come to the head office in Sydney of Service New South Wales is almost every wall, every piece of glass, every door in our floors is covered in physical post-it notes, user journey maps, and prioritization matrices and things of the sort. So we have this proliferation of making work visible. And that's very important because not only does it ensure that there's clarity and communication happening across the teams to try and manage the risks of siloed communication, but to actually bring teams together. But we also practice active collaboration. So we, rather than just having engineers sitting at their desk, filling in Jira tickets or what have you, we want people to be physically engaged and up at a board and communicating their priorities and their challenges. And we found that's been very successful so far. We also have a strong belief in user-centered design. So we're actually constantly going out and engaging the community and getting feedback and using that feedback to feed into those roadmaps to ensure that we have a good alignment between what we're trying to deliver and what the customer's actually looking for. And it's something really important to notice with Service New South Wales is we're not targeting a market of 20-something Instagram filter enthusiasts. We're dealing with regional communities, the elderly, the young, and really trying to cover a very, very broad range of customers who often don't really want to deal with government, but they have to. So it's an interesting problem. An extension of our transformation is we've really adopted this concept of extreme programming as well. So extreme programming takes 3 key themes, the first of which is pair programming. And you can see from the illustration there, we actually have 2 engineers who share effectively one workstation with 2 screens, 2 mice and 2 keyboards. And it's really confusing to watch if you're not used to it. You sort of stand behind them and one person's controlling both screens. And the idea of this is that we're actually collaborating and pairing and rotating those pairs constantly. And what we found is that that gives us a much greater degree of code quality and a much more decentralized knowledge capability within the team. So we don't just have one good engineer who knows everything. We actually have a whole team who are all working interoperably on that code. We also practice test-driven development. So we're writing unit tests before we actually start solving the problem. And the third component that we follow is the concept of YAGNI, or you ain't gonna need it, which is Americanism, I guess. The idea here being that we only really want to code enough to pass the test that solves the immediate problem that we have. So we're not trying to produce excessive code or solve problems that don't yet exist that we're not trying to solve. And that helps keep us focused and helps reduce our time to market, which is very important. Agility in a government organisation takes practice. It doesn't necessarily come easy, and I think it's very easy to say, okay, we're agile now, and then you just assume that you're agile now, and the reality is that's not quite right. So we take a very conscientious effort to actively engage in the practice of refactoring and refining our processes as well as our technology and our code bases. And we'll have retros on a regular basis to really understand what we do and why we do it, and the impact and the consequences of some of those decisions, so that we can increase the empathy and the group understanding of the way that we work and where it works for us and where it doesn't. We also seek to experiment as much as we can and use data to validate the assumptions that we use to set out those experiments. So we can make sure that as we're deploying our services, we can actively measure whether it's been successful or not and use customer feedback as part of that process. Now, in order to practice and experiment, obviously, you need freedom, and that's where the autonomy comes in. So how do we create autonomy for our engineers, and how do we support that process of experimentation? It's very important to us. So at this point, you're probably thinking, like I was, it's all unicorns and rainbows. It's a bit cliche, but it's a DevOps crowd, so what can you do? The engineers that we have, their priority is to drop code. And I think it's fair to say that infrastructure and the supporting technology is often seen as a means to an end to enable that and support that experimentation. And the challenge with that is that if you're not careful, you can end up with what I refer to as zombie architecture. And this is, for example, in some cases you may have abandoned experiments that never quite get torn down. You may see misconfigured instances can be deployed. There is always the risk of public storage containers that we're all acutely aware of, and how do we manage the risk of data loss and so on. And also, the sum total of all this experimentation can be divergent technology choices. So you have, I think as John Willis described this morning, multiple copies of the same solution or sort of orphaned solutions in the environment. And this is very much a case of what happens when you let engineers run wild and free, and how do you manage them, and how do you support that in a manageable, sustainable fashion. So left unchecked, I think what you can see is that risk and complexity can increase over time. And it's very counterintuitive to the DevOps ideal, and it's a very strong reality check that you have to support the autonomy in a way that can be managed and not introduce risk to the organization. So hopefully the animation works. This is a great example of autonomy in action. the person on the left there has solved the problem in a unique and interesting way. They've knocked down the pins and they've met their objective, which is fantastic. And maybe they got there through a whole series of experimentation. Slightly unconventional, but it works, right? Now, striking the balance, this is where we look to bring in some sort of sense of guardrails. So although we're playing, in this case, a game of bowling, you'll notice that there's gutters on the lanes to stop the ball from moving from one game to another. And there's also barriers at the end that protect the ball from going in the wrong place. And there's also automation that resets the pins and makes that environment reusable a second time. And so we're looking at how can we orchestrate the guardrails in a logical sense. We're not playing bowling, please believe me, to support this notion of autonomy. And I think it's really important to understand is autonomy is seen as a means to achieve speed. And I think really what it is a means to accelerate. But what we're looking to do is combine quality with agility to actually get real speed, not just acceleration. And this allows us to ultimately decentralize some of our architecture concerns and our security compliance concerns and create repeatable deployment patterns that support product teams to experiment in a way that is safe and has those guardrails in place. So just as an example, a very simple example, when we provision environments, we use what we call environment boilerplates, where by combining reference architecture and deployment automation, we can ultimately stand up an environment in a very short space of time. And crucially, to that environment, we can attach a number of governance and compliance factors. For example, test automation, logging, and security compliance, configuration management requirements, to make sure that that environment is consistent every time. And by making that self-service to engineers, we can actually accelerate their ability to spin up something and start practicing rapidly, as opposed to waiting for someone to do it or trying to solve the problem without understanding of all those governance risks that can be there if left unmonitored. Now, obviously, this solution will scale very well. We can deploy consistently dev, test, and prod environments in a consistent way, which supports a more consistent pipeline. And it also creates the opportunity for us to do blue-green deployment, so we can actually be testing in parallel to production and then fail over, or fail over is the wrong word, cut over in a non-disruptive fashion to actually test the solution that we're building is an improvement on the previous version, whatever it may be. And the nice thing is here that all of these components in our methodology all feed into that compliance infrastructure that's shown on the right there. So that's the logging, the security compliance, the test automation, those underpinning services that allow us to assure the environment is operating the way that we expect. And by modularizing and codifying this compliance, the other nice opportunity that this gives us is the ability to share this capability with other agencies in government. So we're looking at how we can maybe take some of our patterns and actually share them with other government agencies and create a cross-agency kind of open source model, if you like, where we can share patterns with them, get feedback and improve them. And so you'll see that we have a sort of a versioning concept here that we're looking at so that it can mature over time. So by taking a combination of these environment boilerplates and looking at how we can package up and deploy those incremental changes and deploying them in a consistent fashion, we can then start to build automation in it, because we started on that baseline, then we can move up and we can start to automate upon that and move up. And so it provides us the capabilities to start putting continuous assurance around the environment that our product teams work within. So we're looking at environment monitoring and using tools like static code analysis to enable a much higher degree of assurance around these environments as they're deployed. Now, some other initiatives that we're exploring at the moment is this concept of security champions. So in the traditional world, we'd have a security team on the sideline and we'd have engineers working autonomously. And so to try and decentralize some of that security capability and embed some of that teamwork and that practice in the product teams, we've also identified lead engineers within our product teams and given them the role of cybersecurity champion. And so this creates sort of a force multiplier for what our security team is able to do, and actively creates a security awareness in the product engineering team and creates a two-way direction so that they can communicate back concerns. And it's also a what we call a guild, effectively, like a knowledge sharing capability across product teams. What we want to be able to do is have a solution appear in one team autonomously, but then actually be shared across the group and lift everyone's high watermark, if you like, so that our security awareness and capability increase over time. It's interestingly, the little snapshot there, don't read too much into it, the metrics, some of them were looking at, they wanted to be more involved in security, they wanted more awareness. This is our product engineers, which is really great. We also saw some wanted to have better collaboration across product teams, and they saw this as a mechanism to do it. And some of them on that actually say, because Michael told me. So it's a bit of a mixture. I think the point is that if you look to engage your engineering teams in cybersecurity and try to build bridges between the traditional security team and the compliance team and them, I think that there is appetite to do that, and I think there's a lot of benefit, which we're continuing to explore. Now I have to make comment at the next slide. I saw John Willis's presentation this morning, and I was like, I have the same slide, but I'm going to show it anyway. I did seriously think about removing it, but it occurred to me that the importance here is actually that, you know, there's a collective consciousness around the work that we do, I think, and I think I may have been inspired by some of John's previous work. And so I thought I'd show it anyway. So this notion of survivorship bias, I think, is very important. And as I'm sure you saw this morning, the argument is when these planes returned from their raids overseas, they analysed where the bullet holes were, illustrated by the red dots there. And when they were trying to solve the problem of where to put the armour plating, the rational thought is, well, where would you put it? And I think if I was to ask the room, you probably know differently now, but where would you put it prior to this morning? Anyone? Where would you put the plating? In the cockpit, precisely. So the example here is that we have the risk of we only protect what we see. And there's a very big risk in that when we think about continuous assurance, continuous governance. If we build the expectation into our automation that is solving the problem of making us compliant, we have to really constantly rethink and reevaluate, well, what are the things that we can't see? Sure, our cloud services may be very clearly delimited by telemetry, but what about on-prem? What about the regional offices and so on and so forth? So we're really looking at how we can extend and make more ubiquitous our telemetry and our logging services to get a much richer and more realistic view of where our environment is, and actually seeking to extend that telemetry out to all the edge cases of the environment to see where our blind spots are, because that's really informative. If we can start to combine that telemetry and use that as a baseline, then it's possible to see where an anomalous activity is showing deviances from whatever's normal. And I think that's really crucial here is you can't chase every red flag in an audit log, but what you can see is whether there's a particular surge or a particular variance that is interesting and worth exploring. So that's something we're very conscious of. Another example of survivorship bias is in the past we will have always followed a fairly traditional security compliance, audit review, penetration test prior to go live. And of course we still do that. But what we're looking at now, and again I think this is another first for New South Wales government, is actually enabling a bug bounty program. So we've actually put together with a partner a bug bounty solution to introduce community engagement into our security practice as a way of enabling autonomy within our organisation. And this has a couple of really interesting benefits. The first is it's allowed us to create a vulnerability disclosure policy, and that creates for us a legitimate way for members of the community to tell us if they experience a bug or a vulnerability in our software. And secondly, that allows us to legitimately recognise their work and give them credit for it. And that's really positive, because it's much better to have this information coming in. The other component of this is we've been able to feed that information directly back to our engineering team. And so when you start to front end your services with a bug bounty program and have a direct line of communication to the engineering team, and then you combine that with the security champion concept, you start to be able to disseminate this learning quite quickly between teams. And it's a really good example of where you can detect things that are outside of the norm, that your traditional sort of set and forget kind of compliance tends to manage. And also when you're deploying services and updates constantly, it's very cost prohibitive to do a penetration test every single time you release a new feature. And so this is something that's always running in production all the time, which is really powerful. So just to sum up, we have looked at how we can use infrastructure as code and ultimately repeatable patterns as a means to increase our stability. And that's really helped us get on the first rung of the ladder. And that's taken us a big step forward in terms of consistency. There is a long way to go, I feel, but we are still moving forward in that space. And the opportunities to share these patterns across government and to scale our learnings and engage others to help us develop that is really powerful. Next, we're looking at, because of this automation, we can improve the way that we segment the environments, and we can automate and orchestrate some of the telemetry in that environment. So we get a much greater view of survivability and how we can consistently provide an environment that tells us what is actually going on and where do we have gaps. Building on top of that, we're starting to look at automation and how self-healing patterns can start to engage with that telemetry and solve problems before they hit production. So we can actually detect if someone's attempted to deploy a storage container in a non-compliant fashion, or if there's an instance that hasn't been adequately patched and things of that nature. And so that's really helping us with our resilience, and the bug bounty service is also helping us to pick up those things and develop really a framework for how we can support autonomy within our organization. The next rung of the ladder for us is actually making it self-service. So how do our engineers engage with this through a pull request as opposed to having to go over the room and talk to someone from another team? So we're really looking at how we can decentralize that and make it available to any of our engineers as part of a standard deployment pipeline. So every time we're spinning up a new environment for a product, we can make sure that it's got all the wrapper and the safety features around it that we're looking for, which gives us something we're all looking for here, which is agility. If we can take some of the compliance legwork out of getting access to an environment to deploy your service, we can certainly make it a lot easier. Another example of self-service is we use automated patch upgrades across our container fleet. So we can actually patch in production all of our fleet without taking services offline, which is really great for that agility and assurance. And ultimately, building on that supports that idea of experimentation. It's no longer cost prohibitive to give someone access to an environment and give them the capability to deploy a new version of their code or to try and instantiate a new concept from the ground up, because we can do so in a way that we feel confident that it's got the necessary guardrails around it, which really support that sort of quest for innovation, if you like, which is a big word, but it's what we're aiming for. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to speak to you afterwards. Thank you.